The progress of humankind onward and upward forever. This is one of the unifying points of Unitarian theology, according to James Freeman Clarke, as he wrote in 1886. Belief in the progress of humanity onward and upward forever, that's quite a statement. Clarke lived in a time when the theory of evolution had just been articulated and the outlook for humanity and human flourishing was very optimistic. Today, we Unitarian Universalists understand the nature of human beings to be basically good. We all have in us a spark of the divine. Each of us is worthy of love and justice. We express this every Sunday morning in our welcome when we say that all are welcome here, your presence makes a difference, and everyone is worthy of love, including you. Unitarian Universalism is generally an optimistic religion. This is what distinguished us from our Calvinist ancestors who believed in original sin and the total depravity of human beings. But how does this optimistic theology help us when we encounter things in the world that are unsettling or tragic, or things that we might even characterize as evil? We as a faith have struggled with an understanding of evil that fits with our understanding of human goodness. We've been criticized for not having an adequate theology of evil when faced with atrocities that are clearly not a manifestation of human goodness. World War I and World War II, the Nazi regime, the Holocaust, the atomic bombs, and the deadliness of modern warfare forced us as a movement to re-examine our theology in the mid-20th century. Evidently, humankind was not progressing onward and upward forever. This period in history could have led us to formulate a more cynical outlook on human nature. Cynicism flourishes when we're hurt or disappointed, when people or events don't turn out how we had hoped. When we lose trust in the goodness of people, it's easy to become cynical. A cynical view of human nature focuses on the worst in people. It assumes that human motives are debased. Cynicism says things like, people are greedy and oppressive, and I can't do much about it because they have all the power. The cynical smirk or the shrug of resignation suggests not only a low view of others, but of our own power. But following the world wars, we didn't go down that path. Instead, we chose a path of more hope and optimism. Another James, not James Freeman Clarke, but James Luther Adams, one of our most prominent 20th century theologians and ethicists, sought to clarify the main points of liberal theology for his time. He developed what he called the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion. The 5 smooth stones refer to a story in the Hebrew Bible where David uses 5 smooth stones in his slingshot to bring down the mighty Goliath. The biblical story has been used to talk about the victory of the underdog and to make the point that with faith it is possible to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Adam's 4th and 5th stones are particularly relevant here this morning. The 4th stone is, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. Those are some big words. Meaning, good things don't just happen. People make them happen. And the same is true of evil. While we're basically good, we are capable of both good and evil actions. We are capable of bringing about heaven and hell here on earth. And the 5th smooth stone is, liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. We have what is needed for change, and because of this, we should be hopeful. As Unitarian Universalists, we seek to balance both a healthy skepticism and questioning with hope. Skepticism enables us to look with clear-eyed idealism at the world and to know that we have the power to bring about good. Yet we have cynics among us. I have my moments, I'm sure you do as well. And we live in a society that is quite cynical. I'm reminded of this every day when I look at my Facebook newsfeed, actually. We see decisions being made by officials that we elect that are fundamentally counter to our values, and this makes us feel powerless sometimes. We look at our society's institutions and are disappointed at the lack of integrity. We witness the apathy and inaction of our fellow citizens, and our frustration rises. UT Austin recently put out a report on the civic health of Texas. It included a variety of indicators such as participation in electoral politics, volunteerism, donations to charity, and social connectedness with family and neighbors. And the results were pretty dismal. It's worth checking out this report, but with fair warning, it might make you feel a little cynical. Many of us hold in us both a hunger for doing good and making change and a deep cynicism about such change being possible. It doesn't help that cynicism is reinforced by our culture and our media. The ad for Slate that I talked about in our first reading is a perfect example of this. Irony, cynicism, and insouciance, as the word that the reading uses, are presented as the way that hip, thinking people respond to the world. At the heart of this tendency towards cynicism, I believe, is a fear of disappointment and failure. Cynicism is a coping mechanism that we use for being let down. Instead of really feeling the letdown, we say, well, I didn't want that opportunity I applied for anyway, it would have been too much work. Or instead of acknowledging disappointment, we say, well, the election was rigged and the tactics of the other side were so ruthless that it was doomed from the start. There's no way we could have changed the outcome. The most important thing that I read in this week's chapter of Paul Loeb's Soul of a Citizen is this statement. Cynical resignation salves the pain of unrealized hope. Cynical resignation salves the pain of unrealized hope. Sometimes we salve preemptively. Rather than approaching life with an openness, we retreat into cynicism so that we don't risk being disappointed. We give up hope before we even start. And when we have been hurt or disappointed, cynicism distances us and walls us off from the pain. When hope is hard to find or when dreams have been dashed, cynicism can seem like the best solution. But as Loeb reminds us, there are better ways to live. Anne Frank's perspective in our second reading that Aaron shared has always resonated with me since I first read it in 6th grade. In fact, I remembered this morning that I used it as the starting point for my coming-of-age credo statement when I was in high school. She lived under the brutality of the Nazi regime, and yet she still believed that people were good at heart. She held on to the hope that the day would come when she could live out her ideals. Anne chose not to live in fear that her dreams would be dashed, but in hope that someday her dreams would be realized. Now, we all know the outcome of her story, but this hope that she held on to gave her strength. And it helped to make the years she did have a little bit more bearable. How can we, too, draw more deeply on those sources of hope? There are ways to move from cynicism to hope. Those of you in the Wednesday night book study were quite instructive in this regard. This was one thing we talked about. One person described the process of moving from cynicism to skepticism to hope. Cynicism is sort of a hopeless outlook. It says that no person or institution is reliable and that the possibility of change is unlikely or non-existent. But when we begin to question, does this ring true? And to ask what is possible, We make sources of hope that allow us to approach the world a little more openly. For example, the statistics that I mentioned about voter turnout in the UT Austin's Texas Civic Health Index. When we look at them, they could cause us to despair. Only 36% of eligible Texas voters actually vote. Texas is dead last among all 50 states as far as voter turnout. But let's look at the flip side of this. All those people out there who are registered to vote and didn't vote, and the 38% of eligible voters who aren't even registered. Now, if 95% of people were registered to vote and 90% of those people actually did go out and vote, and when things didn't turn out how we wanted, there wouldn't be a lot of room for growth or change. But there are millions of people in this state who do not vote. They are our hope. I know leading up to recent elections, this congregation was very active in voter registration. You lived out that hope. You lived out your convictions, and you helped others to do so as well. Hope and cynicism occupy the same mental and psychological space in us, and we have a choice of which one we allow to dwell in that space. Ever since the Occupy Wall Street movement, the metaphor of occupying things has become a bit overused, but I think it's kind of appropriate here. I think we should occupy cynicism with things that bring us hope. So let's occupy cynicism with history. One thing that can solve the hurt of unrealized hope is reclaiming history, not as something that happens to us, but as something that we're a part of. When I think about all of the social change that I have witnessed in my relatively short lifetime, it brings me hope. We could look at the movement towards racial justice, or the progress made on reproductive rights in the past half century. Now, there's always more to be done, for sure, and sometimes it feels like we take one step forward and 2 steps back. We saw some of that this week. But we have come a long way. One thing that has brought me great hope is participating in the movement for LGBT rights, something that's important to me personally, but also part of my UU values and my UU upbringing. In the past 10, 20, 30 years, we have seen a growing awareness and acceptance of the diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities among us. It's safer for people to come out today than it has ever been. Same-sex couples can be legally married in 12 states and the District of Columbia. More cities, states, and companies are instituting protections for the rights of LGBT people. The military's don't ask, don't tell policy has ended. There are growing numbers of gay-straight alliances in our schools. This week, the governor of Delaware signed a Transgender Non-Discrimination Act. And we've seen significant changes in Unitarian Universalist congregations too. We were not always as open and welcoming as we are today, but we have been on the forefront of this movement among religious denominations. We are witnessing a shifting tide of public opinion and policy. An example of this that is pretty extreme, I think, is according to the Pew Research Center, in 2004, 30% of Americans supported same-sex marriage. And only 9 years later, in 2013, these numbers are at over 50%. Talk about tidal shifts. This week, there was a fascinating and controversial announcement from Exodus International, a group that for 37 years has been leading programs that encourage people to pray away the gay, and has said that LGBT people need to be cured or healed of their affliction. The president of that organization admitted this week that ex-gay therapy doesn't work. He apologized for the hurt and the hate that they have spread, and he announced that the board had voted unanimously to shut down the organization. He also announced that he was starting a new organization aimed at reducing fear and making churches more welcoming for LGBT people of faith. Now, this announcement was met with an amazing mixture of celebration and cynicism. Many celebrated the shutting down of the organization and their public apology. Especially many of those who went through these programs could have never imagined the day when this would happen and are thrilled and relieved. And many others are cynical about the claim that this new organization will be something different. It just goes to show that cynicism and hope occupy the same space, and sometimes we juggle these two emotions in response to announcements like this one. Only time will tell what comes of this and what form this new organization takes. But I am holding out hope. Hope that this is the beginning of a decline in the number of hateful, hurtful organizations like this one. We are part of this massive shift around LGBT rights, and we are part of this history. Things are moving in the direction of love and justice, and this is a source of hope. So let's occupy cynicism with history, the history that has already been made, and the history that is being made within and all around us. Stephen Colbert describes cynicism as a rejection of the world because we are afraid it will hurt or disappoint us. Cynics always say no, but saying yes begins things. Saying yes is how things will grow. Saying yes leads to knowledge. So will you say yes with me? Yes. Good, I like to hear that. Saying yes invites us to find out what is right and good about a situation and what is of worth. When we say yes to the world, when we say yes to life, when we celebrate what is and the basic goodness of our fellow human beings, we are invoking a power far greater than cynicism. We're acknowledging the divine and human resources available to us, and it is these resources that give us the strength, the vision, and the power to bring about change. And as James Luther Adams reminds us, this justifies our hope.